On today's podcast, we have Mark Shapiro. Mark's career has been a masterclass in leadership and innovation. He's a visionary president and CEO of the Toronto Blue Jays. Mark's a graduate of Princeton University, where he played center and offensive tackle for the Princeton Tigers football team. From his early days in the Cleveland Indians front office to his transformative leadership with the Blue Jays, Mark's journey is a testament to his commitment to excellence. Before making his mark in Toronto, Mark was a driving force with the Cleveland Indians for over 24 years. He played a pivotal role in the organization's resurgence, leading them to multiple postseason appearances, including an incredible run to the World Series in 2016. Mark is recognized as one of the most innovative minds in baseball management. His forward-thinking strategies, emphasis on player development, and keen eye for talent have not only yielded countless wins, but also reshaped the way baseball is played and managed. And now Mark's talents are shining as brightly as ever in the heart of Toronto. As the president and CEO of the Blue Jays, he's overseen the team's resurgence, leading them back to postseason and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in today's dynamic and competitive baseball landscape. In this episode, we'll delve deep into the life and career of Mark, exploring the visionary leadership that has made him one of the most celebrated figures in baseball. From his early days as an intern to his transformation of two storied franchises, we'll discuss all things leadership, talent, and culture. I hope you enjoy. Mark Shapiro, welcome to the Accelerating Excellence podcast.
Thanks, James. Great to be with you.
You've had this incredible career, still going strong, but I mean, baseball, when was the first moment the concept of pursuing a career in this space came to mind for you?
That's a great question. I'm not one of those people that it was necessarily a calling. I think it was more in the search, and the search probably had a journey of two roles right out of university that were not the right roles for me. And I always, when I reflect back and try to learn and think about what I can pass on to a younger generation that I'm talking to, I think it was less about the work and more about the leaders and the culture and alignment. So I always smile and laugh. Had those leaders been different, had those cultures been different, my career track may have been totally different. They weren't, James, and I disconnected. And so I sought out and sought to search. And I think baseball was part of the fabric of my, youth. It was part of the connection, certainly to my father, but to my family in general. So that thought of me being a collegiate athlete, sports having been just a part of my life, competing being a core part of my makeup and my nature, and then thinking about how could I combine business, leadership, and sport, things that I was passionate about and loved. A little bit just lucky, and I think there's some luck, in all successful paths. But that's what, sought me on a path to try to figure out, well, maybe baseball could be that. And then I had a perchance where I went to visit my dad, and I met a bunch of major league executives. And of course, at 23 years old, I was like, I want to do that. And so I wrote the resume and cover letters in 1991, got mostly no responses, and sought out on a 2-year pursuit to try to get a job in baseball.
And when you say, I want to do that, was there anything specific that jumped out at you?
No, but when I interviewed with the Cleveland Indians at that time, the Cleveland Guardians, it was a realization that the two leaders there who I spent my time with and interview with, I want to wake up and work with them. I want to work in an environment. I want to try to work to achieve the vision that they so, clearly and romantically and passionately outlined, because they were the worst team in all of baseball at that point when I interviewed. And they had this plan, this vision to move into a new stadium, to become one of the best teams. And I got to be part of a team that for 7 straight years was a championship caliber team, built, with the vision and the plan and the of those two architects, John Hart and Dan O'Dowd. So I think, that moment was, that looks like a cool job. And that looks like a job that I could combine the things I'm passionate about: sport, competing, leadership, business. But when I really broke down and said, that's who I want to work for and where. It was more about who, and it was more about what their vision was, and just being confident that I could find my way doing that. But it was a little bit of a leap, going to Cleveland, Ohio, no connection there. Packing up a U-Haul truck the day after Christmas in 1991 with my little brother, and driving from New York City, where I was working, as an analyst for a big retail firm, and just going and working in sport with no title, a cut in pay. But I'll tell you what, from that first day I woke up, it was an affirmation of this is where I should be, and this is what I should be doing.
Brilliant. That's amazing to hear. I mean, what do you think are the strengths that you had that enabled you to excel? Because it's one thing capitalizing on the opportunity, which you sort of humbly, you talk about luck, but then you also talk about, you're reaching out to these people, you got given the opportunity, but what enabled you to sort of capitalize on it and make a dent? Because these people don't waste their time, right? If you're taking their cut, they'll get shot of you. It might be a polite way, but they don't tolerate mediocrity.
I think back a lot on that, because I think you get to a certain juncture of your life and your career, and you kind of reflect, and I, like I said, part of it is certainly luck that got me to this point, chance meetings and opportunities. But what is my superpower? What are my strengths? I think if you had gone back and looked at me in high school and grade school, I wasn't a person that was preordained, like, oh, Mark Shapiro, he's going to be a special leader. You wouldn't have said that. You would have said, oh, he's a bright guy, he's talented, he's friendly, but I didn't stand out in any way. And at university, with the top 0.25% of students in the world at Princeton, I certainly didn't stand out there, But I think when I look back, James, at my path, and I look back at the common threads that led me to succeed in the different environments that I've been in, resilience, perseverance, toughness. I'm not easy. I can be knocked down, but I always get back up. So I had that long-term pursuit, things that we didn't know were that grit didn't exist, when I was in my 20s and 30s, but certainly that perseverance, that long-term focus, that ability to take a long-term goal and work and chip away at it. Discipline has always been a core attribute of how I live my life. And I think something that's enabled me to bridge the gap between people that may have more innate a talent than me. So perseverance, curiosity, discipline, toughness in some way, those things probably enabled me to bridge the gap between people that were more naturally talented or innately talented than me.
And in the context of your career at that point at Cleveland, what were the most important things to you in the context of that career and the opportunity you're going to pursue?
Yeah, I mean, very simply, at 24 years old, I had two basic internal benchmarks for myself, that every single thing that was assigned to me, I would do better and faster than my bosses expected. That was it. I was like, if I do that I would get more opportunity. I would get increased, and I think, looking back, that demonstrated to the people that I worked for that, one, I had high standards. And that was an incredible gift from growing up environments where I just had to hold my own. But by holding my own with some incredibly smart, talented, learning-focused people, I elevated my own standards. So I had high standards and expectations for myself, higher than they would have for me. And two was kind of the sense of urgency, which I think when you're working for someone demonstrates that what you're doing is important to you. And it gives them the confidence to give you more. And I always kind of lived by my dad telling me that my dad never was one of those people that said, you need to get good grades. He just said, hey, the better you do, the more opportunities and more options you'll have. And life is a series of creating choices for yourself. And the more choices you have, the happier you're going to be. Now, when I look back, it's hard for me to ignore the fact that I was incredibly fortunate, a white male, that not everybody has the great fortune to be able to just make that statement, right? Like some of us are certainly in a more blessed position to be able to make that statement. But I felt like, I was just creating opportunities and options, and that the better job I did, the higher quality and the more urgency I demonstrated and the more importance and the value that I added, the more opportunity I was going to get to do more. And I wasn't concerned with title. I wasn't concerned with, compensation. I wasn't concerned with accelerating my career on a certain time frame, but I did want to grow. I did want to learn. I did want to develop. I did want to take on more responsibility. And I think very early on, I did want to lead. That was important to me.
And so at Cleveland, you talked about that sort of 7-year journey. What were the big lessons you learned in that sort of, in at the deep end, and then learning with these great individuals around you?
Yeah, I think, I ended up being there 24 years in a variety of roles, which is pretty remarkable in baseball. But I think from those two gentlemen, the two things I learned were just the impact of empowerment. I was the beneficiary of being empowered, and what belief can do for a young, talented person. And when you feel that sense of someone believes in you and is empowering you, I've sought to pay that forward throughout my career, because I was the beneficiary of John and Dan believing so strongly, which to me, again, now we have all these different labels, imposter syndrome. I didn't understand why. To me, I was like, what do they see in me? What is it? I hadn't done anything exceptional. I was just a young person, but I had ideas and to transform our player development system, for instance, to kind of look at a different way of developing players. And John was like, yeah, you're a guy. Go, I got your back. Do that. But it didn't make any sense for someone 24, 25 years old to kind of reframe the way a group of people thought about player development that have been doing it for their whole life, for 20, 30 years. And that belief and that empowerment is something that was incredibly strong. And Dan, really modeled the discipline that I talked about earlier. He is as disciplined and as competitive of a human being as you could ever imagine. And so whether it was waking up at 5 a.m. to get a workout in, or the way he organized his day, that learning and understanding that discipline really does create so much opportunity in your day, from a time perspective, from a work capacity perspective, from a competitive perspective, that it can really be an advantage.
Brilliant. And in terms of player development, obviously your role in baseball across the years has been broad, but player development at that point in time, was that something that was sort of, you got chucked at, or was it something you're like, hey, I like that, and I think I can have a go at that?
Yeah, no, it was, I was purely, I was literally guided there by Dan O'Dowd. We were growing rapidly. We were a tiny front office. He basically had told me, like, listen, you've been working on some of the most glamorous sides of the business. You've been working on, I also was doing some not very glamorous things like picking guys up from the airport and pulling off game reports, but I had been working on contract preparation and analysis and trades and a lot of the background work that goes into transactions. And Dan said, you're working in the very romantic, sexy side of the business, but you need to have a core foundation of something that you build your career upon. And he was, at that point, both GM and the director of player development. We were growing fast and we needed someone full-time overseeing player development. And again, it was a little bit nonsensical to assume I could do that and lead people who were twice my age with decades of experience in uniform and very different. But he said, I want you to, move into player development and lead that area. and it was, and to this day, remains the area of the business that I'm most passionate about, because and you and I share this passion, because it's not just player development, it's human performance, right? And it's that obsessive thought on, what can lead human beings, regardless of any field, to bridge that gap between their potential and their performance most frequently. And how do you think about holistic development of the player, mentally, physically, and fundamentally, not just one area? And at that point in time, James, we're talking, 30 years ago, the game was largely just focused on the fundamental side. There weren't a lot of resources being deployed to the mental side or the physical side, even, believe it or not, the strength and conditioning. We certainly didn't have high performance areas thinking about nutrition and sleep and hydration and recovery, and those words didn't exist in our vocabulary. I had some basic understanding that the nutrition that we were providing players was a disadvantage, and there was an opportunity to beat people if we framed those kinds of things. And so, but it would be, it was so rudimentary, it would be hard for you to believe how we fed players and, prepared players to play, and our lack of knowledge and insight into the very basic components of recovery. And so quickly, as I learned more, it was like, okay, there's opportunity here, that we've got to get people in a game that's resistant to change to be open-minded to it. So the leadership component was a reality, but there was huge opportunity to do things differently and do them better. And at the core for me was engage and involve the players in the process, not do it to them, but really engage them and start to talk to them about taking ownership and accountability of their own development.
And how do you do that in terms of, I've worked in some environments where, I guess, how do I put this? People are reluctant to change, because to them, they're, like, well, I'm up here, I'm doing the job, I've been doing it at the highest level, I don't need this. I got to this, to where I'm at with doing X, Y, Z, Mars bars and cans of Coke sort of thing. How do you lead those hard-headed sort of alpha type personalities?
Not easily. It's not, I look back and laugh and think about some of the days that I was in a room leading guys that were in uniform and had been in uniform for 30, 40 years of their lives and were twice as old as I was. And, but like anything in life, I had to establish credibility and earn respect and trust first, which meant I had to listen and understand that they had an unbelievable amount of value to pass on, and ultimately, try to convince them that I wasn't telling them to do a different job, but just to think about their job differently, to organize it a little bit differently. And that really, for me, kind of set off on that reality that, I live today as a 56-year-old, which is, you don't have a choice. You either adapt or it's going to pass you by. If I was still doing my job the way we did our jobs in, the mid 1990s, I'd be long gone in the game. I've had to adapt and understand that we have so much more information to make decisions. How we make decisions is model-based now, as opposed to anecdotal and gut-based decision making. There were so many biases in the way we made decisions. I think I innately understood that how much better we could be when I was framing and was basically more system and process back then. And then ultimately the way we made decisions, James, that has changed exponentially because of the amount of information that we generate and the way we organize it. So, just a constant, it's an understanding that learning and adaptation is essential to be successful, and then helping others to understand that as well. And at the core of that, in our business is competing, that you're competing against others. And so you're trying to get better.
Absolutely. And, would you say, I guess, that that journey of bringing almost human performance from the dark ages to the high tech data, like, eliminating bias, the sort of relentless, not leaving a stone unturned in terms of edge finding for human performance gains we're in now, was that a sort of slow, continuous improvement? Or for you, were there sort of tipping points where you felt like there were certain periods of times where there was a step change in baseball in general, but maybe in the teams at Cleveland?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely step changes along the way. I think just like transforming culture and transforming, operations, that it's painstaking hard work, and it doesn't always feel like you're making progress. And you have got to be, it gets back to those things that we talked about at the outset, that what differentiates me, in my career. And I think that determination, that not being discouraged, that focus on the long-term goals, it's hard to measure the progress as you're going through it. You don't always get the feedback along the way. When you start to see players succeed that you thought maybe didn't have a chance to succeed, and when they start to be able to articulate for themselves the value of that holistic development, the value of the mental side of their game that was developed, the impact that a more detailed player plan, had in their development, involving them, helping them to understand, take ownership, and enabling them to, really own their own career as they progress from level to level, because baseball is kind of like a curriculum. You're going to progress through 5 or 6 different levels along the way with different instructors and different coaches and different experts. So the one common fabric is yourself, and you need to know yourself.
Yeah. And would you say there's a player that stands out as someone you think that really leveraged the benefits that the human performance as a science and these processes and systems you're talking about has to offer?
Not necessarily one in particular, because the ones that probably made the biggest impact were the ones that probably would never have made it to the major leagues without the resources and tools that exist in the modern game. But maybe they didn't have long careers, but they got the most out of what they had. And I think, to me, our mission as a player development staff back then, and really is today too, was to help each player to reach his true potential, mentally, physically, and fun, regardless of what that is. So a lot of times that true potential might be the AA or AAA level, which is short of the major leagues. But I wanted each player at the end of the day to be able to look in the mirror and do, they did everything humanly possible. We provided every resource possible, that we aligned on, how we were going to help them get better. And they reached whatever that, when they lay their head down on the pillow at the end of their career, they knew they reached that potential. Whether that potential was a 10-year major leaguer, whether it was just getting a cup of coffee in the big leagues, or whether it was falling short and being a minor league player. And then I thought, and I think this is trying to be meaningful and altruistic too. Hopefully we're impacting their lives as well. So some of the great calls I get now are guys that have gone on to have successful careers in the business world and have said the things that we learned, the discipline, the systematic approach to thinking about your development, the commitment to developing all facets of ourselves as human beings, those things, the importance of being focused in the present, not caught in the past or obsessing about the future. Those tenets are still core to successful human beings when they move on to other careers. Because every single baseball player, even the ones that play in the big leagues for 15 years, are going to move on to other careers, right? They're going to, at 40 years old, they're going to have to take on something else in life.
Absolutely. And in terms of leadership, it's something you've gone on to excel in. What's your advice to young, ambitious leaders who are perhaps just stepping into those positions where they have command or authority over a group of individuals, and they're trying to take them from point A to point B in terms of achieving outcomes, which unfortunately is the hard currency of performance?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. That's the tripwire, right? Like, if you get fixated on the outcome, you're going to shortcut. You're going to undervalue human beings. You're going to probably not focus on the process. I back it up a couple steps and think about what that advice would be. And I would start with the awareness of self, because if you do not have self-awareness, if you are not clear, what your values are, what your compass is, what your framework for making decisions in your life is. Those decisions are who your partner is, how you're going to lead, who you want to align with and associate with, the things that are most important to you. If you're not clear and self-aware, and ultimately, probably most importantly, aware of your insecurities. Because what I've seen, when the disconnect happens from leaders to people they're leading, it's almost always people who are not aware of their insecurities and don't manage their insecurities. Every single one of us has them. I haven't met a human being that doesn't have insecurities, right? It can be your education, your upbringing, your culture, your physical appearance, whatever it is, we all have that. And so being aware of them and ensuring they don't undermine your ability to connect with people. So starting with that self-awareness, and then probably moving, next to that awareness of others and being deeply empathetic and compassionate. You have got to care deeply and authentically and genuinely before you can connect and lead. So self-awareness first, awareness that the awareness piece is just so big, and it's two-part. It's self and others. And the others piece is really empathy and connectivity. And you cannot connect. You have to connect to lead. or to teach or to coach or to do anything that you're helping people to be their best, and you have an inability to connect on any sustained level unless you are deeply empathetic and caring. It's got to be genuine. It's got to be authentic. You got to really want to help people to be their best. So, we've talked a little bit about that trip. You can trip up if you focus on the outcomes. Even though you want to competitively and obsessively focus on achieving and overcoming, the challenges and getting those outcomes, I think the core of it's got to be, you've got to really want to help people be their best. And, the byproduct of that, and the byproduct of really strong process and, really good systems are, you're ultimately going to achieve some pretty great things. But, the obsessive focus on achieving great things is more your own ego and not the focus on helping people to be their best.
That's great advice. And in terms of creating high performance environments, I think you would have clearly worked in organizations that set high standards in what they expect from the professionals within them. How do you enforce high standards? I mean, discipline's a topical issue, how have you gone about enforcing standards? Or
yeah, it's a great question, but I think if you have to think about that, you've already lost. You're already done. I think that the identification process is where the high standards come in. And again, this is a learning from when I look back at my life and think about the environments that I was dropped into, whether it was the Cleveland Guardians front office or whether it was Princeton University or the family I was around, the high school. I was in environments of high achievers that, were not necessarily articulating that they were demanding a lot of themselves, but they were driven. They were driven to be the best version of themselves. They were driven to learn. They were curious. They wanted to get better every single day. They were focused on some opportunity to get better. And I think when you organically drop those people into an environment where you clearly articulate the vision, the direction you're trying to go to, the guardrails of the values are clear and articulated. They're part of the hiring process. And all those people are competitive as hell and driven to be their best. The standards happen, the expectations happen. They're holding each other accountable for high standards and themselves accountable for high standards. And those are the environments that it's so gratifying and fulfilling to work in, because every single day when you go into them, you've got a chance to learn something and grow and get better.
Absolutely. And you talked about their selection or, in terms of talent identification. I mean, at the Blue Jays, what's, if you could outline to those listening, what is the process that you would undertake in order to select those sort of superstars who maybe aren't quite superstars yet?
Are you referring to, when I think about talent identification, I think it starts with the office and the people that work here, and then it goes to the players, because, in our hiring process, to try to be simple about the things that I think might be important to focus on or differentiate us. And obviously live and exist in a bunch of other major league organizations now that all have kind of the same lineage and the same understanding. It started in Cleveland, where we were one of the lowest resourced and smallest market teams in all of baseball, and we had to overcome that. And no one cared about, that being an excuse for us to compete with the Yankees and the Red Sox and, the biggest market teams. So we knew that our culture had to be our competitive advantage. That had to be, that we had to have a scalable competitive advantage. And that was no inefficiency, no energy on credit and blame, hiring really, really, really talented people without any focus on hierarchy, empowering those people and expecting those people, James, the day they got there to make us better, not to pay their dues, not to go through some, hierarchy of like who's in charge. If you were to drop into meetings, and I think this is like something to think about, you would never know who the senior people are. That, that the meetings were just collectively focused, obsessively and collectively focused on getting to the best decision, the best outcome, the best process. And that's the only focus. So, when we hire, we're looking to hire people that align with the values. So we clearly articulate the values, and we are looking to hire people that make us better the day they get here. not so they may have some skills, some experience, some background that's going to be additive, that's going to complement the people that are already in place. And the hiring process is an extremely rigorous one, far more rigorous than people would expect for an entry-level intern, and everybody owns that process. Not just, we don't outsource hiring to HR. Hiring is a process that is owned by senior leaders and owned by everybody in the organization, because you have to live with the realization that the biggest opportunity you have to impact the business today, tomorrow, and 5 years from now is that entry-level hire. And for us to be competitive with teams that have greater resources than us, we need to realize just how important and how special those opportunities are. Every one of them is a pearl, and we can't miss. They're essential. They're huge opportunities to impact people and to impact the organization. So it is I'm not giving it credit, as an extremely rigorous, multi-tiered process, the hiring process. And it is collectively owned by everybody. And there's an understanding of how important that is to our success now and in the future.
Oh, I love that. Now, in terms of your career as a leader so far, is there a moment that stands out, or perhaps a period in time where you felt like you've been demonstrating everything you've got in the locker in terms of your leadership skills and abilities? And if there is, could you perhaps talk us through that moment or period in time?
Yeah, it's funny. I think it's obviously a sign that when you get old, people start asking you to reflect back on those meaningful moments. And I'm not a very moment focused person. I tend to. It's like I always get that question too. What are your regrets? And I don't really have any major regrets either. I think because I look at them as learning opportunities, and I don't. I think the most important area I could have regrets are had I not focused on my time with my kids. That's the area that I didn't want to have regrets. But there are those moments, and I guess what I would call them is an affirmation, right? Like, you set out as a young leader and you're thinking, and I think if you do want to lead, it's inevitable you do this, that when you're not leading and you think you may want to lead, you're going through every environment as a laboratory, as a learning opportunity. You're listening to every talk and every meeting a leader reads, and you're thinking, oh, I disconnect from that, or, oh, that resonates with me. That fits my style. That fits my leadership attributes. And when I get a chance, I'm going to take this piece or that piece. And you're kind of building that mosaic of what your individual leadership is going to look like from the great people that you had an opportunity to learn from. You cannot imitate any one person. If you do, it will be inauthentic. So you're trying to piece together your authentic leadership style. And there were things that drew me to the people that I wanted to work with, and I felt were that compass I talked about earlier, for the organization that I wanted to create and the people that I wanted to lead. And that was really focused around a values-driven culture that was focused around rewarding, identifying, acquiring, and building a team and rewarding players that were not just talented players, but also good teammates, good people, high character. Were really people we could hold up to kids and say, this is someone that you want to be like. And there was a moment in 2007, after I became general manager, when we turned over the entire team, in 2002, 2003. We got to be very competitive in 2005, but fell short. Nature of very small margin for error in 2006, we backslid. And then 2007, we led the major leagues in victories, and we knocked the Yankees out of the playoffs in Yankee Stadium, right in New York City, on the biggest stage in professional sports. And it was dead silent there. And I was looking around the locker room as our guys were celebrating. And my thoughts were kind of twofold. One, to all the people behind those players, right, that helped us acquire them, develop them, build a team, the identification, the acquisition, the development, the deployment of talent, all the people, the hundreds of people that were behind that the greatness that it required for us to get to that moment. And two, that we didn't compromise. That when you talked about it earlier, when you're focused on those results, it's very easy to rationalize and compromise your values because you see a talented player. We made some very tough decisions that are great case studies we walked away from some unbelievably talented players because they didn't fit. They weren't good teammates. They were distractions. They were inefficiencies, even though they had a ton of talent. And that was a risk, a definitive risk, because objectively we got worse when we did it. But we had that group of players that outperformed objectively what they should be, because they were not just talented players, but great people. So when I looked around that room and I saw Victor Martinez and Travis Hafner and CeCe Sabathia and Grady Sizemore and Casey Blake and Jake Westbrook, I can go on and on. It was an affirmation that you don't have to compromise, that you don't have to take shortcuts, that you can stick to your beliefs and your values, that great players can not just be talented, but also good people and good teammates. And more than anything, and this is kind of private, that it means more when you win with those types of players than you do when you just are focused relentlessly on outcomes and just focused on talent and talent alone.
That's incredible. And it's really reassuring to hear. It's absolutely fantastic. I guess the flip side of a peak experience is perhaps that time where metaphorically we almost sort of get that kick in the underpants. Has there been moments like that as a leader that have really challenged you and sort of, whoa, how am I going to get through this?
Yeah, I mean, those are defining moments. I think when I first became general manager and I kind of led my first set of meetings to think about, okay, we've got this massive challenge we've won for 7-8 straight years, and now we don't have a lot of young talent internally. We have an aging roster. We've got declining revenues in the market, which was no one's fault. We've made trades. The team is aging and probably can't compete anymore. Okay, Mark, here's your opportunity. Deal with that. Find a way to win. And the very first major transaction trade that I oversaw, I led that meeting and I led that process and made those decisions the way that my predecessor would have, John Hart, who was my mentor, So, and in reality, one, it didn't fit the circumstance. The circumstance had changed and I was just trying to cling to how we did it for 8 years. It was successful when we needed to adapt to a new set of operating conditions and parameters. And we needed to reimagine what our organization was to be competitive. And two, I led it like he would have. He was a different background. He was a former player, coach, guy that was in a uniform, very different type of leader and different type of decision maker. It was a bad decision because it was not clearly aligned with a strategy and a plan. It was kind of linking to the past, but acknowledging the fact we had some tough changes. So it was in the middle. It wasn't decisively in one direction, but mostly because our process was flawed and it wasn't a process that was going to fit an organization that I would have to lead or the circumstances that we had. And I think as we did our after action review, which we didn't again have that word, but we knew to review our process and learn from it. I probably think back to my assistant at that time, who now is one of the most respected executives in the entire game. And if anyone could say like their greatest mentor was an assistant, not someone they worked for, it was me, benefiting from Chris Antonetti and how he changed the trajectory of my career. I wouldn't still be in the game if Chris hadn't worked for me. Because he challenged me to be better. He challenged me to realize that we couldn't make decisions the same way. And he continued to do that for the 7 years he was my assistant until I eventually, made him general manager and I moved up to president. And he continues to do that today, to lead in that way, that he's asking himself and everybody else to always think about how they can get better. So we learned from it. We got better. It was the realization that we had to acknowledge things had changed, one, and we had to change as an organization the way we made decisions, and two, that we needed to be decisive and move strongly in one direction and outline what that strategy was, and it needed to be authentic to the skills of the people in place, not the people who had been in place.
Understood. I mean, in terms of sustaining elite performance across time, whether you're a player, you're contributing in the organization in a different way, or you're the leader of the organization itself, it takes a lot of time and energy. Like, professional sport is ruthless in terms of the intensity required to deliver results. How do you sort of sharpen the axe as you go?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think one of the benefits of the further I go is trying to simplify the answers to questions like that and not make them sound too complex. And I guess I'd respond to you that um, sustaining it, you know, starts with valuing people and understanding how important people are, and not getting caught up, not devaluing people because you're obsessively focused on the outcomes. And then two, and again, it's going to sound like a soft skill. It's going to sound like a less than competitive focus. But if you have a learning culture, then you are focused on improvement, perpetual improvement. And having a learning culture, throughout an entire organization is a scalable competitive advantage. And I say that because if every single person in the organization, from player to trainer to strength coach to mental performance coach to analyst to database manager to front office executive, wakes up every day thinking, there's going to be an opportunity for me to grow, develop, learn, and improve today. And I am going to commit to getting better today. I'm going to find a way for myself to get better, and in turn help our organization get better. Then that to me is scalable competitive advantage. And we're never standing pat. We're always waking up and thinking about that continual improvement, growth, development. We're staying humble and open-minded. And I think that if I was to think of one thing that is essential, it's to back away from that noise that comes from the results. That can be a small set of data, can impact, because it can cause emotion and momentum that leads to a bad decision. Get back to a good process, a good framework for making a decision, a good system, and ensure that you are a learning-based organization, that you're humble and open-minded, and that you're focused on improving every day.
Fantastic. I mean, in terms of your own performance day to day, your own craft, is there any specific habits, routines, or this gets done, whatever happens, and I need it for the sake of not just performance, but for the sake of having a life? Is there anything like that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like, it's always that there's been that, again, it's dangerous to say always, no matter what, right? Because you start to get obsessive a little bit. But I know that I need to have my time to exercise in the morning. That routine it's a core part of my discipline, my physical discipline that leads to my mental discipline, regardless of what time I have to wake up, where I am, what it looks like, the fact that I can adapt it. But it's kind of like a non-starter for me. It's like brushing my teeth. It's not a decision. I'm not saying, oh, maybe I'll work out today. It's, oh, I'm going to work out today, right? And it starts my day in a couple ways. One, it gives me a little bit of meditative time for me to focus on my breathing and kind of recenter myself. And two, it is the ultimate demonstration that there are things within my day I can control. And I think a general life philosophy for me is kind of control the controllable. And I live in a world where there are tons of things that I cannot control every single day in the competitive landscape, from health of a player to, officiating, to our competitors, to the economic landscape, to COVID, to, there's tons of things. So waking up and working out every day says, I can still seize control of this, and I can demonstrate this level of discipline. And then reading something each day that's going to give me the opportunity to learn and open myself up outside of baseball, outside of my field, of study. And it's usually more article than it is book, but sometimes it's book, focus as well, from thought leaders that I respect, to philosophers, to something that's going to cause me to think a little bit creatively and outside of the box. And then I'm just fortunate that the people that I'm around every day, James, are people that are going to challenge me, people that are going to ensure that I get better, that we're tackling huge problems together and challenges together, and that, being around them is going to stimulate me to continue to learn and grow. So, that physical activity, rigorous, strenuous physical activity in the morning, some meditative, application of breath work or focus around that prior to that, some reading and a moment to kind of reflect and learn a little bit at some point. That's a little bit less disciplined, the time frame that happens. And then making sure I'm interacting with others in our organization because I respect them and they're gonna challenge me.
Yeah, you can certainly tell from the way you talk about them. And in terms of the sport itself, baseball, I mean, there's been some sort of landmark changes that they're quite exciting for me as someone who I watch it intermittently. Unfortunately, being based in the UK, it's not something that I sort of make time to do. And one of the barriers actually was that, games last a long time for us. We used to a 90-minute soccer match or an 80-minute rugby match. But I wondered if you could talk to those listening about some of the changes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the on-field committee, so it's been something that it's been a kind of both an honor and exciting for me to work on something that kind of help shape the game and help the game move to a better place. And I think, again, it gets back to one of the things that makes baseball great is the tradition that it's steeped in, and that the game largely hasn't changed, whereas the other American major league sports and basketball and football are very different games now than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. Baseball's largely the same. Just the size of the individuals might be a little different, but the game's the same. However, the world's changed, and the amount of dead time that was in the game of baseball just didn't fit in a community where we're not used to much dead time at all. We're used to instant gratification and, picking up our phone and kind of instantly accessing everything we want to access. And the ability to grow the game, which isn't important on the business side, really forced us to think about the dead time in the game, the action, the amount of time between action in the game. And that was the core problem. How can we reduce the dead time and infuse more action in the game without injuring players or hurting players? And so, the pitch clock has been a core, focus on that. It took us 7 years, a long time, to both identify what the biggest the largest lever would be, test it thoroughly in the minor leagues to ensure we wouldn't be doing harm or detriment to the game, and then ultimately introduce it in a respectful way to our players who would cause to play the game differently and to feel differently. But the impact has been palpable. Our games are a half hour shorter, and it's not necessarily about length, it's about action. The amount of dead times decreased markedly. So we probably pulled the biggest lever. That's the only down. Athleticism, action, you can appreciate it even if it's new to you.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess innovation, no one gets to sort of avoid it to some extent. And I guess on that note, in terms of human performance in baseball, in elite sport in general, what do you think elite sport's going to look like 5-10 years from now?
Well, I think I don't really have any idea, and that's the beauty. I think I embrace that unknown. There are so many incredibly talented people coming into the frontier of thinking about human performance and how to advance it, whether it's what the impact of AI is and how that impacts, our ability to kind of think about, make decisions, help people achieve, their best, or whether it's the integration of technology and data and analytics into every aspect of how we make decisions and develop players and identify players. What I do think and what I love about baseball and sports in general is that regardless of how much data and how much analysis and analytics we have, that we are still dealing with human beings, as our core asset, right? They're not stocks, they're not real estate, they're not, certificates or paper. And when you think about human beings, the ultimate challenge and the ultimate excitement and the ultimate potential lies in how to help human beings do things they should never be able to do, how to help teams achieve a greatness that on paper they shouldn't be able to achieve. And history is full of examples where human beings perform and achieve at levels that they objectively should never perform and achieve at. And so to me, that can never be quantified. We'll never be able to quantify that. We'll be able to ensure that we are controlling the controllable. And I think that is always something that I'll be, where are the opportunities to continue to control and get better and contribute. But leading human beings to do great things is going to be non-quantifiable, no matter how much data analytics technology we have in the game. And
can help you learn more about the individual to perhaps expedite your ability to optimize or assist that individual.
Yeah, you're understanding it better, but you're not fundamentally doing anything different. And I think probably what led people to be successful 500 years ago are still the same attributes, characteristics, and traits that lead to elite performers now. The better understanding of it helps us get more people to achieve it, maybe.
Yeah, and to democratize access to it and hopefully shift the baseline for everyone, right? In terms of your career, what's most important to you at this stage of your career? I can tell how much you care about people.
Yeah. I think, what's most important to me is that I continue to learn and grow and develop and encourage others around me to learn and grow and develop, and that I continue to help nurture and develop the leaders, future leaders of baseball and business and other areas of life, that, I can give back by helping others do great things. I don't need to be necessarily viewed or in a position where I'm pulling strings and making decisions. I don't think that's necessarily where my greatest strengths lie, but helping build organizations that, encourage people to be their best, to continue to lead others and expect and ensure others, achieve their goals. And that, again, I think for me to wake up every day and think about the Toronto Blue Jays being the best place to work and the best place to play, and all the little things that are behind that, James, within that is meaning and purpose and fulfillment for me enough to last me for a while. And when it doesn't, it'll be something else, growth and development and leadership focused in another arena, and I'll go do it someplace else.
It's so lovely to hear. And in terms of the Blue Jays, I mean, this sounds like there's so much exciting stuff going on at the moment. I mean, I wondered if you could share some of I guess, what you're most excited about in terms of the team and the organization over the next few years.
Yeah, we've undertaken a lot of large infrastructure projects over the last 8 years. Some of them are resource and facility, focused. We've built a giant state-of-the-art training and development center in Dunedin, Florida, which is best in class. And if you ever get a chance to visit, is an incredible place to foster and think about how design can impact culture, performance, values, and help players be the best they can be in every area. We're doing the same thing here in Toronto with a massive $350 million renovation of our stadium here, both from a fan experience perspective and a player experience, player facility perspective here, that'll be complete in sometime during the next season. And obviously, we've built out all the resources here across the performance areas and the analytics areas and the front office areas and the decision-making processes, all those things, and infuse the values. So those things are all in place. We built a very talented major league team that's right in the heart of its competitive cycle right now. So we're ultimately, the biggest piece left for us is to compete to win a world championship. And that's what we're seeking to do, and we'll continue to do until this competitive window closes. And then, the process will lead us to the next competitive window with the next group of players. So, I'm focused on continuing to ensure we have incredibly talented, aligned, values-driven people leading that organization, and that we continue to get better, and we control everything we can control each day. Brilliant.
And I want to ask you this question because I think people will love to hear it. I know you've almost you've answered it in numerous ways almost throughout this conversation so far, but I'm sure there are people listening right now who perhaps are potentially stuck in a rut. Maybe there's a little bit of doubt inside them in terms of their perception of what they're capable of, but deep down they sort of think or believe they've got a bit more in them. What would your advice be to people in that scenario?
Yeah, I think it would be that whenever you think about the big picture and you get focused on the future and kind of the progress and what I need to do to be happy and I need to get to this spot, it can be one, overwhelming. Two, it can be distracting. You can start to define it in ways that are not authentic to yourself, but really defined by others around us. We all are subject to that trap, of kind of letting someone else define for us what success looks like. So I would get back to, within the 24 hours ahead of you, what in that cycle represents an opportunity for you to improve and develop and grow and learn. Is it simply ensuring you get a good night's sleep and that you wake up and that you do something that, challenges you physically and that you're eating good food that, keeps your energy level throughout the day and that you're around people who challenge you and to encourage you to learn and develop and grow and be curious and ask questions instead of telling you what to do or telling yourself what to do. And if you start by the little things that are focused on you being the best version of yourself as a human being and of a person, and you commit on a disciplined level to doing those things every day, you'll look up and you'll continue to grow and get better. But when you start fixating on needing to reach certain markers that are actually defined by someone else other than yourself, because they delineate someone else's definition of success, it leads to a disconnect, it leads to discordance, it leads to unhappiness and a lack of fulfillment. So surround yourself with people that are like-minded, that share a set of values, that share a philosophy. Do the little things within your sphere of control instead of fixating on all the little things that you can't control. Focus on what you can control and commit to growth, development, both physically, mentally, and your skill, whatever business you're in.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you for sharing that with us. I just wanted to sort of wrap up our conversation with some quick fire questions and I'm really intrigued to hear your answers to these. Now, the first one is greatest team of all time.
Greatest team of all time. I think probably have to go back to those that, since I watched The Last Dance, those Chicago Bulls teams, and, that combination of a coach that was philosophical and thoughtful about how to get the most out of his talent and a talent that was generational, historical, and Michael Jordan that just transformed, what that game could look like.
Absolutely. And then and maybe the answer's there, but greatest athlete of all time.
Ooh. Yeah, I don't know that you could pinpoint one. There are probably so many, and probably so many outside of my, understanding in fields. I'd hate to do a discredit, but certainly Michael Jordan is one that, Tom Brady is, to me is someone worthy of, consideration just because, he was not heralded as a young player. He got so much out of his ability. So those people, and, they've transcended what success looks like.
And leader, greatest leader of all time.
Marcus Aurelius, maybe.
Oh wow, yeah, what a guy.
I don't know that you could come up with one, but certainly, when I think about someone that, was leading but still focused on thinking about, what it meant to lead and how it can impact others, and not just leading for power and leading for outcomes, but also focused on being the best version of himself as a person and giving a lot of time and thought into that. I think that's, someone that is worthy of study and consideration and pretty incredible. And then there's no, and flawed as well. There is no leader who's not flawed,
Sure. And talk about, foundational principles transcending through time. I mean,
yeah,
what a guy. And now some more sort of personal ones, but favorite movie? It's got to be Moneyball, right,
Favorite
Mark?
movie. I mean, Field of Dreams. I'll have to go to a baseball
Right.
movie,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's just
gotta
like,
be.
to me, it's everything beautiful about the game of baseball. It's a heartfelt movie. It's maybe not my all-time favorite, but it certainly is up there.
And you were obviously played actually in the Moneyball film. I know that's probably one that makes you cringe as it comes up, but
it makes me cringe. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I thought it
That's
might
okay.
slightly annoy you, but I had to bring that up. Another great baseball movie. Favorite series?
Oh, The West Wing, by far.
Okay.
Not even close. Yeah,
Yeah.
Aaron Sorkin, just the writer, the the characters are so rich. I could watch that series over and over again. I know it's American, but I think it would transcend, leadership, decision making, human beings and their frailties, but still doing it in a laboratory of kind of, great consequence, and just what a great, timeless and great series.
We're almost there. Favorite book?
The one that probably meant the most to me early in my life was The Fountainhead. I don't view that to be black and white anymore. It's more gray, but still, it was important to me to read in my early 20s and kind of say, oh, there's some incredible thoughts within objectivism that are meaningful to me. The one that was more transformational to me probably about 10 years ago was a book by an education writer, Paul Tough, called How Children Succeed. Grit, curiosity, and the power of character. I forget, I'm messing up the second part of the title, but How Children Succeed, which is really not just how children succeed, but it was kind of a holy cow moment for me, that this is everything I've seen in successful people, that grit, curiosity, character, these are all areas that we don't commit enough time to thinking about. And that caused me to dive into a little more into Angela Duckworth and Adam Grant and some other great thinkers as well.
Brilliant. And last question, if there was one message or lesson you've learned across your career as a leader and a human performance expert that you could sort of cement into society that it might need at this point in time, is there anything that stands out?
Probably words I've spoken already like 20
Sure.
times on this, and that's be humble, open, and learning focused. If you really do, if you're truly humble and you walk through life truly open-minded, that you could learn from anyone, and you're not focused on hierarchy or how we kind of view the world, who is more valuable, but you walk through life with that beginner's mindset, that it could be anyone that you share an elevator with, talk to at the checkout counter in the grocery store, meet on the street, that there's an opportunity to learn from anyone, and you are committed to improvement and growth, that there is a happiness and a wisdom and a fulfillment, as well as a pattern for success within them.
Mark, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure people are going to be taking immense value from that. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. Thanks for viewing it to be even the slightest bit value additive or important. And to me, it's just regurgitating what I've learned from so many other great people. So it's not anything special for me.
It's invaluable to me, and I wish you and the Blue Jays the absolute best for the rest of the season. And hopefully we'll speak soon.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that.
What a great conversation with Mark today. I love his sincere desire to set people up for success, genuinely just want to make them better. I think the other thing that stands out with Mark is his discipline to process, and that ability to stand strong in your principles and not compromise, even when the shiny allure of chasing outcomes can become very appealing. And that echoes multiple guests on this podcast so far. The importance of avoiding getting caught up in short-term noise and chasing results that might feel great today, but ultimately will impede our ability to perform tomorrow. It's a really important prism to judge your actions through, and another reinforcement of that fact that your development tomorrow is what should dictate your thinking and actions today. And that's something that Mark clearly keeps front and center. Another point that resonated with me, linked to the fact Mark is particularly renowned as an individual who has excelled at this, is talent identification. It's clear speaking to him how important it is And I think his sport as well, baseball, is one of the leaders in the domain when it comes to identifying talent and the professionalism of doing so in terms of the approach they take. There's obviously the famous example in terms of the film Moneyball, where Brad Pitt plays Billy Beane, who was the GM of the Oakland A's. And of course, Mark Shapiro is featured as a key character in that film. But that leads me to what I'd like to talk about today, Penguin. For me, talent identification is the bedrock of all elite organizations. In fact, if you don't get this right, I'd go as far to say that it's very hard to excel at all at the organizational level. So the $1 million or even $1 billion question is, how do you predict a superstar that isn't a superstar yet? Now, in sport, coaches are on the constant lookout for the next Cristiano Ronaldo, LeBron James, Tom Brady, to convert the team from aspirational contender into championship winner. And it's the same in business. Venture capitalists are constantly on the lookout for the entrepreneurs on the cusp of launching the next Facebook, Uber, or Amazon. All over the world, in every field, from academia to music, thousands of hours are spent on identifying potential high performers. Many organizations spend millions to attract superstar talent, only to cough up even larger severance packages to get rid of their failures. It seems exceptionally difficult to spot future superstars in any profession. Each domain is going to have its own lingo, culture, and heritage, but the talent question is one that torments us all. Failures in talent are an absolute nightmare for so many of us. Getting it wrong leads to job losses, bankruptcy, relegation, plummeting share prices, and hundreds of millions of pounds flushed down the toilet. Whatever the domain, you all want to find the superstars before your rivals do. If you don't unearth LeBron James, Mark Zuckerberg, or J.K. Rowling, someone else will. Ultimately, you're looking for a competitive advantage. If you can identify talent more effectively than the competition, you increase the probability of producing winning results. Now, success is usually recognized at the organizational level, whether it be the inner workings of Google, SpaceX, or Goldman Sachs. But an organization is just a group of people pursuing a common goal, which is why an organization can only be as extraordinary as its people. Because people are so critical, identifying and retaining talent is possibly the biggest challenge any organization faces. One of the best chances of ensuring our organizations excel is to make sure you have the right people pursuing the right goals. Talent identification is basically venture capital. We're making an investment. It's about people, time, and money. We all have limited resources, whether it's salary caps, effort, management, coaches, squad space. We must apply a filter to decide how to spend those resources on the performers you think will be most successful. Fundamentally, it's a prediction problem. The objective is to learn to predict who's going to become a gold medal performer in their respective field. Outlier organizations already know this and expend infinitely more time, effort on screening for those future superstars. As Mark shared, talent identification pipelines must be created organically, not discovered nor outsourced to a sales team. And so many organizations pay millions to recruitment consultants who in reality aren't talent identification specialists. They're salespeople. The issue with hiring the wrong people is that you end up having to live with, fix, or fire them. And it's only a matter of time before other team members inevitably suffer by compensating for their teammates' deficiencies. One weak member results in a devastating reduction in overall performance as teammates are forced to mop up errors, divert attention from their primary role, and redo work. Most organizations spend 2% of their time, effort, and finances on talent identification and 80% managing their mistakes. A team's momentum is derived from all the members performing from a place of concordance within their roles. When you increase the quality of the talent you bring into the organization, you'll receive back tenfold in terms of, say, time, money, management, morale, leadership, sick days, innovation, and most importantly, the spoils of superior performance. The overarching idea behind teamwork, full stop, is that the whole is worth more than the sum of its parts. Elite performers standing on the shoulders of each other, creating a compounding effect. That is what we're after. In almost every organization I've consulted with or worked in, I immediately see the colossal mismatch between what science knows about talent identification and the traditional manner in which most organizations approach it. So what are some concrete steps you can take to improve your ability to identify and retain concordant talent? Now, in order to introduce a step-by-step process to conducting world-class talent identification, you first need to understand the detriments of the traditional manner in which most people go wrong. There are some key limitations within the status quo when it comes to talent identification, starting with the belief that talent can be bought. This, for me, is limitation one. We like to think you can just budget in a ready-made superstar or just blink away all your problems. This is only possible if, one, you're rich and you don't mind sharing your riches. Two, you stay rich. And three, no one else gets richer than you. Even then, there are no guarantees the superstar will be concordant with your specific organization. And the research suggests that organizations in sport and business are absolutely abominable at this game. The reality is that it's not even an option for most organizations. Plus, constantly buying talent is not a real edge. It's a band-aid, magic pill, or silver bullet. Inevitably, the price of the silver bullet is inflated thanks to bidding wars, and it becomes a race to the bottom. Most poaching attempts are leveraged by the recipient to bargain for higher pay from their existing employer. Then you're held to ransom by established superstars. And inevitably, organizations with bigger budgets will win this game. And there will always be someone with deeper pockets ready to pounce. You can't beat homegrown talent, whether it's the New York Yankees core four or Manchester United's class of 92 or Julian Robertson's Tiger Cubs. The ability to generate homegrown talent is a key predictor of an organization's ability to excel. Limitation two, the smart and competent trap. The smart and competent trap is one of the ways organizations fool themselves by hiring people with enormous but not the right talent. When not headhunting for superstars to poach, the traditional approach to talent identification includes an intense preoccupation with qualifications. In particular, the belief that those with good grades from highly ranked universities make the best performers. Likewise, a person's prior experience in a similar role is assumed to be a predictor of being a high performer in a new one. Many weight selection heavily on such drivers. The idea that smart people with good grades are a sure thing is a bad one. Those with good grades are often shunted into respected professions like medicine, finance, or law. Just because you've got the smarts does not mean you can perform in a role or that you should. These individuals have a set of strengths that will enable them to compete in most professions. However, being smart helps people to grind, cuff, or blag their way through, but not necessarily excel. Unless their interests and values also align with that specific role, they'll end up flat, minimum effective dose in everything, and dependent on external motivation to prompt them into action. They're reliant on carrots and sticks versus an internal compulsion to excel. Also, the risk is that you turn away a lot of potential elite performers whose concordance with the role was not reflected or ignited by academia. Likewise, being qualified is not necessarily predictive of superior performance. Just because a person did the same job somewhere else doesn't mean they should do it for the rest of their life or for this organization. The key point here is this: you can train competency in a certain role, but you can't train psychological firepower. Possessing the right competencies, qualifications, smarts, or experiences is not enough to achieve results unless the psychological factors are also right. The level of performance ultimately achieved is going to be proportionate to the performer's intrinsic fit with the role. This is what's going to ignite their psychological firepower and unlock the confidence, resilience, motivation, creativity we all know drive elite performance. Limitation three, superficial screening. In most organizations, screening tends to be haphazard and based on chaotic, superficial scans instead of rigorous examination of a candidate's strengths, interests, and values in relation to the specific requirements of the role. CEOs and hiring managers commonly hand out jobs expecting elite performance without acquiring any evidence of the characteristics, the strengths, interests, and values that we know accurately predict elite performance. What's worse is these managers who've conducted superficial scans then have the audacity to moan about how their employees don't perform to the level they expect. Their natural next step is to implement leadership training, management workshops, team building, and morale boosters to motivate and appease weak talent identification. Instead, they should preemptively allocate the time and effort and thought required to screen and make sure they have the right people chasing the right goals in the first place. Limitation 4, ego. Too many organizations complain about not having enough talent. Many talent identification programs are blinded by egotistical assumptions about how special or unique the role they are hiring for is. That's just an excuse. Talent is not your problem. It's your approach to finding talent that is your problem. The challenges of talent identification stem from a weak strategy, not a lack of talent. Talent exists everywhere, and it is the owner, CEO, or manager's responsibility to identify, develop, and retain it. I don't care if you're trying to identify potential Premier League footballers, surgeons, or pop idols. As we begin to map out what excellence looks like in terms of talent identification, you're going to start to see where your talent identification process is potentially leaking or breaking down. Limitation 5, the interview problem. Interviews are a painful process you nearly all must go through at some time in your lives, whether it's giving them or receiving them. When asked the question the interviewer has read in some manual called 50 Questions to Guarantee Great Hires, the candidate will usually respond with a classic that they've read in How to Ace Interviews. What is your biggest weakness? The questioner will say, set in a trap by utilizing a cliche to find out how humble and honest you are. Well, I'm a bit of a perfectionist is sufficient evidence that the candidate has at least read How to Ace Interviews and turns the weakness into a positive. Is very often stock question upon stock question with stock answer after stock answer after stock answer. Behind the scenes, it becomes a futile competition between hiring managers as to who can come up with the most creative curveball question. You can't spot superstars by sitting behind a desk chatting. In business, too many are hired based on talking a good game. Most talent identification consists of a chit chat instead of a robust, repeatable, scientific methodology. The problem is that talking about performing is not performing. We can bullshit talking, but you can't bullshit doing. There are very few roles where the ability to interview well is causally related to superior job performance beyond the general ability to communicate. For me, this is where Ralph Waldo Emerson's famous quote strikes home for me. What you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. We have all at some point been forced to work with the individual who is incompetent and yet presumably smashed the interview before ending up a disaster in action. Likewise, you've almost certainly let gold slip through your fingers over the years. The person who was unconvincing in the interview who turns out to be a wizard on the job. Unless the job is to be interviewed, why place so much isolated emphasis on one process? The transfer to on-the-job performance is so poorly linked to actual performance. So if interviews are useless, and pretty much all the available evidence shows this to be true, why do we insist on using them? The answer is that we love a good story, and interviews provide a more interesting and memorable narrative about candidates. The issue is these narratives are highly inaccurate and riddled with bias. We are really good at making up stories to confirm our own subjective and often useless first impressions. Plus, interviews are easy and they're the way it's always been done. It's much harder to do the thinking required to produce and operate an evidence-based talent identification process. So most don't bother, which is amazing for us. Limitation 6, bias. I want you to imagine two police officers sat by the side of the motorway. They're using their eyeballs to measure the speed of passing vehicles. He's going too fast, shouts one officer. No, he wasn't, says the other. It's absurd to think about ticketing drivers based on this approach, but it's done day in and day out during most screening processes. And perhaps this is the biggest obstacle with talent. We are riddled with biases about what drives success. Too many people use only their feelings, observations, judgments, and life experiences to evaluate candidates. And it's akin to the scene in Moneyball, which Mark was featured in during his time at the Cleveland Indians, where the head of talent spouts pearls of wisdom such as ugly girlfriend means no confidence. It would be funny, except that this sort of thing is far too common. Bias has allowed smart, well-groomed, good-looking people with polished CVs who know the right people to hack the system, which is great for them. Our education system is designed to manufacture such people. Inevitably, they rat race their way to excellence that inevitably eludes them and the organizations they serve. There are a whole host of biases that make us awful at predicting future successes. There are four main culprits, though. The first one is natural talent bias. Here, you tend to grossly overestimate ability if you believe there are signs of natural talent, despite the fact that you all like to think that you prefer hardworking strivers. You'll genuinely opt for those you perceive to have natural gifts. Two is the recency effect. This describes how you place more weight on the last thing you saw, which is why rock stars always save the best song for last. And we leave thinking that the whole gig was great. In sport, the recency effect is rife after big tournaments, particularly World Cups. You'll see the player that played well for 2 or 3 games transfer for hundreds of millions. 3, the halo effect. Here, those who start strong are overestimated in the future. So for the performer who starts well, the impression is more likely to stick, even if performance subsequently drops off. 4, we have confirmation bias. This occurs when you look for proof, especially when there isn't any, to confirm your first opinion on a matter. For example, in football, if the talent scout likes a player they're scouting and that player loses possession of the ball, the scout might describe the player as positive or adventurous for, trying to unlock the defense. The scout that didn't favor that same player observing that same action would describe that behavior as sloppy, irresponsible, or greedy. To optimize talent identification, we must shift the pendulum from subjective, superficial, and biased, good grades, big bench press, towards a more objective, evidence-based approach. We need tools, data, and facts to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that the individuals we're bringing into our organization possess the strengths, interests, and values required to excel in it. If you're asking someone to do something challenging for your organization, you need to take the time to ensure they align with and can internalize the meaningful rationale for giving their all when doing so. Archaic organizations that rely on interviews, subjective opinion, biases, and tick-the-box qualifications will be annihilated by the organization that uses the objective, concordance-focused, evidence-based approach that I'm going to talk to you about in our next session. The aim will be to unpack exactly what world-class talent identification looks like. I want to wrap up with saying a massive thank you to Mark. He's recognized as an iconic leader in baseball, but his ability is more broadly recognized across all elite sports, especially in North America. I'm so grateful to have him take the time out to speak with us. And Mark, I'll hopefully see you in Florida soon. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us today. I love this topic of human performance and excellence, and I've been engaged in it neurotically for the last 20 years. It's a sincere privilege to have the opportunity to share my knowledge, network, and learnings with you. Now, go and put the principles to work. Make sure you let us know what resonates. Reach out with questions, blind spots. We've got you covered. Remember, excellence is just a series of days repeated over and over again. Now go and win your day. In 2021, I published my first book, Accelerating Excellence. If you're finding the conversations and information on this podcast useful, you might want a physical reference point and to gain even deeper awareness of the concepts discussed. The book's actually more of an operation manual containing more detail with a step-by-step guide on how to implement all this stuff so you can get maximum benefit, which was one of my main motivations in writing it. Yes, I want the podcast and the book to be inspiring and entertaining, but it was non-negotiable for me to make sure that the listener or reader is provided with a structure and direction in terms of actually putting this stuff to work. The book's called Accelerating Excellence. It's a #1 international bestseller. And if you're moving from more than just interest towards implementation, I think you'll really enjoy it. Like Everything I do, the book is evidence-based, but practice-led, drawing on my experience working with some of the world's most elite, exclusive, high-performing teams and individuals. It's filled with highly actionable strategies you can apply today to become better tomorrow. If this sounds like something from you, see the link in description where you can download 6 chapters of the book for free in either audio or digital format. It's also available to purchase on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and at your local bookstore. I hope you enjoy. By now, we all know the importance of a winning mindset. We're bombarded with elite performers telling us that mindset's what separates the best from the rest. That if we want to be successful, we need to be more confident, resilient, and motivated. And of course, when panic strikes, we need to calm down, relax, or chill out. Great, we get it. But the question is how? We're given this guidance with almost zero practical advice in terms of how to achieve it. Where can we actually go to develop that world-class mindset? What's the back squat for resilience, the bench press for confidence, and the bicep curl for positive thinking? Well, that's why I created the Mindset app. Through the app, you'll gain access to the psychological skills training used by world champion athletes, special forces operators, and some of the world's most successful traders and investors. The reality is these guys pay me a fortune to help them get this right. But the thing is, these skills are equally, if not more important for the aspiring athlete, executive, or operator. And that's exactly why I created this app. I want these tools and training available to anyone, anywhere, anytime. Mindset is a skill, and like any skill, it can be developed with the right strategy and effort. The tools and techniques are designed in a way that will literally rewire your brain, like learning to ride a bike or drive a car. All the techniques are designed with creating a high-performing, self-regulating you 2.0. Every strategy in the Mindset app is backed by empirical research. There's 10-minute emotional control training exercises that have been shown to increase your ability to overcome detrimental decision-making biases by up to 80%. In another study, just 3 weeks of executing visualization training led to 34% improvements in performance. Another research group found 50% greater improvements in the rate of learning. And just a few weeks of performing visualization led to 22% reductions in anxiety and 21% increases in confidence. These numbers are phenomenal, and I've never met an elite performer in any domain that can afford to be missing out on this type of edge. What I love most is that we've structured everything so that you don't need to carve out an extra hour in your day to get this done. Small bite-sized chunks of 5 to 10 minutes are all it takes. In fact, I'd only encourage you to use the tool on your commute, in the sauna, at the end of your working day, or bolt it onto the end of your gym session. Any dead time you have can now immediately be transformed to deliver you extreme performance gains. My goal is to remove every possible obstacle to your development. And with that in mind, the basic package is completely free. Visit the link in description and sign up for our pre-launch free emotional control, visualization, and performance routine programs. I really hope you enjoy.